Great. Thank y'all for being here. Thank you, Holly, for letting people in. We are going to get started as this is going to be a jam-packed hour of knowing how to, well, recognizing and learning what guilt is, maybe reframe what caregiver guilt is. We'll look at some distorted thought patterns as well, how that impacts us as caregivers, well, how it impacts us just as human beings, to recognize some of these distorted thought patterns, guilt, how it influences our lives, and how maybe we can reframe to have better outcomes throughout our lives. We are the James L. West Center. We are a nonprofit here in Fort Worth, Texas, and we serve persons impacted by dementia. And we do that through a variety of services. We do have our building here in Fort Worth, and we can take care of about 112 persons living with dementia, whether it's long-term care, they come here for short-term rehab. We do have a day program as well that's located in Southwest Fort Worth. That participants go during the day, they get programming, they get socialization, they get interaction during the day, and then they go home at night. And then we have our education that you are taking advantage of today. We offer a variety of education classes for families, healthcare professionals, the community at large, to really help us all in this journey of dementia and aging. In this program today, we are able to offer 1 hour of CE credits for nursing, social work, licensed counselors, and a certificate of attendance. So I will say this at the end, but you will receive a follow-up email this afternoon with all of the information about how to obtain CE credits, how to fill out an evaluation that will be required. We really ask that everybody fill out the program evaluation because we do read the feedback and we take it into consideration. It helps us plan for our future program. And also we'll be sending out resources. So you will get a copy of the slides that we go over today. I plan to drop them in the chat, but I'm having difficulties with that. Some other difficulties, so bear with us. You will get a copy of the slides after the program today. I apologize for your note takers out there, but if you just take some notes and transfer them later, you will get that information.
And Jamie will also send information on the support groups. A couple of people have asked about that, and so she will send you that information, or you can email me directly. I put it in the chat, my email at hglover, Glover, at jameslwest.org, and we can send you the links, times, that kind of information. But Jamie will put that in your follow-up email.
Yes, perfect. As well as information on our upcoming programs too. So Holly and I sat down not too long ago and scheduled out 2025 and really detailed at least the first half of 2025. So you'll get information on all that as well. But today we are talking about caregiver guilt and twisted forms of thinking. So we're going to talk about the first half today. We're going to talk about guilt, how to reframe that, and then we're going to look at some specific thought patterns that can be disruptive to us as human beings, but to us as caregivers, and what that looks like, what that sounds like in our caregiving journey, and how we can work through that and reframe some of these thought patterns so we can have more positive outcomes. But do you ever feel, see if you recognize yourself in any of these statements, or you can identify with some of these, but do you ever feel that other caregivers manage better than you do? Do you ever feel bad or guilty about how you may have treated your loved one before they were diagnosed? Do you ever feel bad that you overreacted or you lost your temper? Do you ever feel that you want time apart from your loved one? Do you ever feel you betrayed or broke a promise? Maybe by moving your loved one into a care community? Do you have mixed feelings about your loved one's death? And it might be their actual physical death, but it also may be feelings of asking yourself, how long is this going to last? Do you ever feel that your thoughts or feelings about your loved one have changed? And usually in a negative manner. Do you ever feel embarrassment or failure for getting help from others? Or do you ever feel that you're bad or guilty for neglecting other aspects in your life or even other relationships in your life? I would imagine you've had some of these feelings, or maybe currently living with some of these feelings right now. And these are normal responses to caregiving. But we're going to work through some of this. And those are feelings of guilt, right? And guilt is a painful emotion, a difficult, uncomfortable emotion that we have when we believe that our actions or our thoughts have violated a moral or a personal standard, or we have inflicted harm on somebody. But these feelings of guilt really have put undeserving blame on us, especially if it's an imagined offense, or it comes up from a sense of feeling of inadequacy, or I'm not doing enough. A lot of guilt is based in should have statements. We're going to talk a lot about should and should have, but it's based in, because a lot of times, well, I should be able to take care of my loved one at home throughout the entire course of the disease. And so a lot of guilt's based in those thoughts. But it's also, we can experience guilt because caregiving is stressful. It is complex. Particularly caring for somebody with dementia, it's hard, and it does bring feelings of depression. It brings feelings of inadequacy, burden, anxiety, and guilt does often coexist with other emotions that come along with caregiving, and those are the feelings of grief, loneliness, and shame. So guilt really coexists, or lives hand in hand with those emotions as well. But I want to talk that guilt is normal, particularly as a caregiver. But we have to be careful about those could have statements and those should have statements. I could have done, or I could be doing, or I should have. So it's normal, but we need to be aware of when and where guilt does become disruptive. But know that we all have limits. You're a human being. And I hope you know, or you start to believe after today's program, that your health and your happiness are just as important as your loved ones, or it's no less important as the one you're caring for and those your loved ones that are around you too. So your health and happiness is just as important as those that you're caring for. And if you don't believe that now, hopefully you will before the end of our program today. But where does guilt come from? And it comes from a variety of things. So it's wrongdoings. We may have done something wrong, whether it was intentional or it was unintentional, or we didn't do something that we thought we should have. And this can be self-inflicted. And I think the majority of caregiver guilt is self-inflicted. And these are the feelings of guilt, the thoughts of guilt that are generally based in unfair expectations or unrealistic expectations that we've put on ourselves, or that maybe other people have put on us as well. So guilt can come from guilt triggers or other people in our lives, and we'll talk about that too. But this feeling of guilt, so I want to look at guilt objectively and what it is, and really how it can be a positive motivator. So you have there, it's positive motivator, because we can look at guilt and there might be things that we did wrong, whether it was intentional or not intentional, but it can help us to see that we need to change our behavior. So we may go apologize, we may rewrite something that we did that was wrong. It helps us change our behavior. And then it helps us forgive ourselves. So we can say, all right, I recognized something was wrong, intentional or not. I need to apologize for that. I need to rewrite my behavior, rewrite those wrongs, and I need to change how I move forward so that doesn't happen again. So guilt can be a positive motivator. It can help us rebuild. It can help us to have a more positive future. However, guilt can also be extremely destructive, particularly if we live with the guilt or we allow it to take control over our lives. And a lot of that is because we're ruminating about it. And like we mentioned earlier, it's an uncomfortable emotion and it's painful. And that emotion sometimes hard for us to let go, or even if we work through it, or it's hard for us to work through it because it is so painful. But we don't want it to become destructive to our lives and the lives of those that we're caring for. And so we might ruminate in it. So now we allow it to control our lives. We give it more power than it really deserves. And it can be paralyzing. It increases the stress that we already have. It increases anxiety, increases these feelings of inadequacy. And of course, if we have these increased feelings of powerlessness, inadequacy, feelings of depression, helplessness, helplessness, then that's going to inform how we behave in the future. So it's not healthy for our present lives, but it's also not healthy for our future lives. So this disproportionate guilt, it's unproductive. It's a lot of the time based in falsehoods, or it's not based in truths, and it's irrational. And what we're doing is we are allowing these feelings of responsibility for things that are generally beyond our control. And we know that being a caregiver, that there are very few things that we have control over. So sometimes we might have to take stock of, well, what do I control and what do I not have control over? I've listed a few things here on the screen, but we have control over our actions, our responses, our behavior. We have control over our choices. I'm going to choose to work through some of this guilt, or I'm going to choose to ruminate in it, right? I do have time or control over how I use my time, and I have control over my self-care. What I do not have control over, however, is the disease process or a diagnosis. I don't have control over it, that it is progressive, and that there's death and there are losses throughout the course of this disease. I don't have control over other people, their lives, their choices, their feelings. And I don't have control over not knowing then what I know now. So I didn't know what I didn't know, and I don't have control of that. So we have to be careful of saying, well, I don't want to put responsibility on myself for stuff that I don't know. Right? As I learn it, right, and learn new things, learn different ways of doing things, I can do things differently and better, but I can't take responsibility because that equals guilt for those things. And this is self-inflicted most of the time. And most of the self-inflicted guilt is unrealistic and it's unfair. And it comes from, we're not really fully knowledgeable. We really don't know what to expect in the progression of dementia, with our particular situation and our loved one, because we know that our abilities are going to change. Our loved one's abilities are changing, but so are ours. And this means emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, socially, relationally, all of these things are going to change. And we're not entirely sure how it's going to change, right? So we have to ask ourselves, do I have unrealistic or lofty expectations about my situation or about myself as that caregiver? In some examples there, I might say, well, I can still work full time and be the primary caregiver for my husband. Maybe for a short period of time, but is that realistic, or is that a lofty expectation? Mom and dad will always be together and we'll be able to stay in their home. Is that unrealistic? Is it too lofty? I will be busy. I know my schedule will be a lot busier, but I'll still be able to keep up my same lifestyle, my same relationships outside of caregiving, my same work performance, all these things, the same standards I have, even though I'm going to be a primary caregiver. And we have to ask ourselves, is that realistic? And putting out these unrealistic, sort of lofty expectations of ourselves, and we don't meet those, generally lead to feelings of guilt. But I want us to stop and look at guilt. So we've looked at guilt objectively. We're looking at what it is, really what it isn't. But guilt is, so we know we've committed a specified or a known offense, whether it was intentional or not intentional. And that's guilt, right? And we can work through it, or we can allow it to take over. But then there's regret. And regret is a feeling of sadness or repentance or a disappointment over something that has happened. So you want to ask yourself, is what I'm feeling regret over something that could have been done differently? Or now that I know differently, I will do differently, but I can't feel guilt over something in the past that I didn't know. And we need to call it what it is. And I'm going to have us work through an exercise. But sometimes, I think more often than not, these feelings of guilt can be replaced with feelings of regret. I regret that happened. I regret I responded that way, but I have new knowledge now, or I have better skills now. Because chances are you did the best you could with the information you had or the situation that you were in at the time. And our hindsight is 2020, right? So it's different from a different angle, or hindsight is different from a different angle. And we have to be realistic about this. So asking yourself, are we really feeling regret rather than guilt? So let's break through the cycle of destructive guilt and kind of reframe some of these guilty feelings. And it looks like asking ourselves, is feeling guilty an appropriate response? Is the guilt I feel based in actions, or is it based in feelings? Did I intentionally cause harm to somebody? Is it self-imposed by you? Are you self-inflicting it, or somebody else inflicting this guilt on you? Are they giving you a guilt trip when that's not fair, or that's not based in reality, or it's based in some falsehoods? And then asking, do my feelings of guilt benefit myself or benefit my loved one? Do I need to take action and apologize, or work through this guilt and learn and do something differently? Or do I need to just reframe it and say, I shouldn't feel guilty about something I had no control over. I regret this happened, and if this comes up again, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So it's, my guilt may not always be the best response. It can impact my attitude, it impacts my behavior towards others in the following ways. So again, you're going to get a copy of this presentation slide. So you'll have these on here so you can work through these exercises. And I highly encourage you to take the time to sit down and be honest with yourself. Is this guilt I'm feeling, is it destructive? Have I allowed it to take over? Is it not realistic? And do I need to work through this because it has impacted my attitude and my behavior towards, maybe it's the person I'm caring for, maybe it's for other family members, you name it. And we do need to accept that we're limited. And we don't need to judge ourselves, right? And it's easier for me to say this than done, but I will not judge myself for my feelings. So it's okay to have feelings of guilt. It's okay to have feelings of inadequacy, but we want to work through them and make sure that we're living true feelings. And I'm not going to judge myself for the feelings that I have. And I will start giving myself credit for my intentions, my intentional choices, my intentional actions, and the good things that I do, because I want to accept the fact that I am a human being. I will make mistakes. I have and I will, but I'm going to work towards working through these twisted thoughts, which we're going to talk about, but work through reframing these feelings of guilt and or regret. So here's another way to look at it. And it's just replacing the word guilt with regret. I regret I lost my temper when my loved one X, Y, or Z. Instead of saying, gosh, I feel so guilty that I lost my temper. I shouldn't have done that. I knew better. I regret I lost my temper when. I regret that I feel sadness or anger or resentment. I regret our relationship is strained. We're both trying to take care of a parent. We both have our own lives off to the side, and I regret our relationship is strained. But there's always going to be a but. But we're going to work towards more positive ways to make it. It's strained right now, but we're going to work together. We're going to try something differently. I feel resentment, but I don't feel resentment towards my loved one. I feel resentment towards the disease. So as we start to reframe and as we learn more about this disease, it can help me reframe these feelings. Excuse me. And we want to make sure and give ourselves credit and focus on all the great things that we have done. And we want to do this on a regular thing. So these are the kind things, the selfless acts that you do every day by being a caregiver, those loving acts. That whether they're seen or not seen, we need to focus on those. We need to recognize them and write them down. List them. Tell somebody else. Tell yourself in the mirror out loud. These are all the great things that I've done, the kind things, the selfless things that I've done every day. As if I do this, it's going to help us offset the feelings, this uncomfortable feeling or painful feeling of guilt, regret, and things that we wish we could have done differently, right? But we're working through it. And this really helps us focus. It kind of switches magnifies the positive of stuff. So we're starting to talk about some thought patterns that are more positive than are negative. Some other things, we want to give ourselves permission to feel, right? Just mentioned, we want to tolerate the negative feelings. We don't have to give into them. We don't have to allow them to take control, take over our lives, but we tolerate them, okay? And we recognize them really and accept it, that this is hard. We are going to have guilt. We are going to have regret. We are going to have sadness, but we need to name it, and we need to name it appropriately. So is it really guilt, or is it really regret? Is it remorse? Is it just sadness? Is it, we need to name those feelings with the right name, the right labels, so then we can take them. And we take it one day at a time. And some ways to do that is if we shield ourselves from others, or situations that tend to make us feel guilty, or they start to have us question our actions or question our decisions. So this might be we shield ourselves from other people in our lives, those guilt trippers. Or we recognize when somebody's trying to add guilt to us. And we go back to and say, wait, I don't have control over this, so I'm not going to feel guilty about something I don't have control over. And then we need to be kind to ourselves. We're kind to everybody around us all day, every day. We are selfless, we're giving, we're caregivers. So we need to give care to ourselves. And this is a lot of times if we need to talk to ourselves like we would talk to a close friend. Would you say to a close friend or a best friend of yours what you tell yourself? An example I have is I tell myself all the time that I'm dumb. I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have died, But I would never tell my brother or my dad that they're dumb or that they're idiots. So if I'm not going to tell them that, then I shouldn't be telling myself that. So we don't want to allow this negative self-talk to add stress, but add unnecessary or disproportionate guilt to our situation. And we have to invest in us. I mentioned there, one thing that we do have control over is our self-care. And we have to invest in that. We have to take intentional actions every day to practice self-care. And when we practice self-care, we can continue to provide the best care for our loved ones with less feelings of guilt and less feelings of inadequacy or depression or anxiety, whatever it may be. And we do need to give ourselves credit. Give credit where credit is due. So we do a lot of things every day, things that are seen and things that are not seen. So we need to recognize those and give ourselves credit. And how would you feel if someone did all the things for you that you were doing for your loved one? If y'all were able to switch roles, right? What would you say to that person doing all the caregiving to you that you were doing for your loved one? What would you want to say? Maybe that's an exercise you practice this afternoon. But you see yourself, that you're saying that too, the thank yous and how grateful we are and etc. And helping others with knowledge you have gained by sharing your story. This really helps us. We say we want to be kind to ourselves, but we also want to support ourselves. We want to practice self-care, but also we need to look for, shield ourselves from others and people that are negatives or situations that are negative. Well, can I put others in my path that are supportive, that I can share my story with, that I can work through really these hard emotions with, that understand the situation? And that goes to a support group, which we mentioned earlier. You'll get information about that. Can I put these trusted people in my lives to help share my story, help them share theirs, so we can continue to gain knowledge and gain skills together? Maybe it's a family member that we're doing it with, but we're putting those right people in our place in our lives. And I want to say this perfection isn't real. I think it's a common misnomer that we all think we need to be perfect. We got to be the perfect caregiver, right? We got to be perfect at what we do. But this is Dr. Barry Jacobs. He is a psychiatrist, a geriatric psychiatrist. He's worked with AARP. He's very well known, but he says that guilt is part of who we are as caregivers. So this is kind of that acceptance, right? There will always be a difference between what we are truly able to do and what we think we should be doing, which causes the guilt. Work to accept the fact that it's not realistic to do everything. And as we do that, it helps us reduce the feelings of guilt. Are you trying to be everything for everybody? Or are you trying to do and be everything for just one person? Because that's not realistic. We can't be everything for one person. We certainly can't be everything and for everybody either. When we strive for perfection, I want to be the perfect daughter, the perfect spouse, the perfect worker, we are setting ourselves up for failure because too much of what goes on in life is out of our control. So no one expects us to be perfect. You might expect yourself to be perfect, but nobody else does. So we have to let it go. And not every emotion, especially those guilty emotions that come up, are rational or appropriate response to a situation. Excuse me. Reading this, accepting this, taking this in, doing those exercises and working through guilt, helping us reframe what that guilt is, will help us with this acceptance. It will help us let it go. And it will help us really figure out, is my response, are these feelings of guilt or depression or anger, are they appropriate to this certain situation or to this certain person? Is it appropriate, or is there a better way to respond? And this leads me into some common twisted thought patterns or distorted thought patterns. But guilt can be destructive. It can be distorted if we allow it to take over. It's disproportionate guilt. But there's also quite a few, I want to say 10 to 15 different types of thought patterns. And it really, I mean, have we ever had a negative thought or a feeling? Yes. Does your attitude lean towards the negative side of things? Maybe not always, but at times. Does it? Do you see your glasses half empty? Is it half full? Does that change depending on where you are in your life? We all have twisted or distorted thought patterns. That's just part of being a human being. But if we have these twisted thought patterns that are left unchecked, they're going to become just as disruptive and destructive as unchecked or disproportionate guilt. So we have to challenge these negative thought patterns. We have to recognize them, we have to challenge them, and we have to reframe them because they do lead to destructive things in our lives. It does increase our anxiety, our depression. It performance. It makes relationships much more difficult than it needs to be, and it adds undue stress to where we're already high stress that we have. And these are really these thought patterns, these distortions in thinking, whatever you want to call it. They're twisted, they're distorted, they're destructive thought patterns. Really do they're based in an inaccurate reality. So if you're kind of seeing a theme here, is this true? Is this accurate? Is this an appropriate way or an appropriate way to think about or to feel about this situation? Was something misinterpreted? But usually it's always bent in a negative way. So we have negative attitudes, we have negative thoughts, negative reactions and emotions to things. They are caused by these distortions in our thought patterns. And it does lead to we're one-sided, it's inaccurate. So we're viewing our world, our situation, certain relationships inaccurately. So they're based in falsehoods, not based in truths. It's unfair. Not only is it unfair to the person or the situation, it's unfair to you. And it can lead to bitterness. It leads to depression, anxiety, self-criticism, decreases our self-esteem, our confidence. It feels like hopeless and helpless. But there are ways to identify what these thought patterns are and help us reframe them so we do not have this destructive outcome because of these thought patterns. And that's the great thing, is it's within our power. We have the power to control our thoughts. We can change and reframe our thoughts. I mentioned there's about 10 to 15 different common, I should say, distorted or twisted thought patterns. We do not have time to walk through all of these today, so I'm going to briefly go over just a few of them. Excuse me. And then this afternoon, you can follow me. we will, I will send you more information about the ones that are listed up here so you can read about those and recognize them and work through those if you identify with some of them. But we do want to start with the should or shouldn't statements. If you're shoulding all over yourselves, if you've heard that phrase, but it should, shouldn't, musts, and oughts are also included that. And it sounds like, I must get over this. I ought to have done better. I should be able to do this. I shouldn't be this way. I should or I shouldn't be doing this or that. I should be able to care for my loved one, right? We tell ourselves these should and shoulds nots, and we expect them to be that way. And this is really a pessimistic view of our situation or our world, and it's really not based in reality at all. The danger of shoulding is it puts unreasonable and unrealistic pressure, expectations, and demands on ourselves. It can lead us to avoid certain behaviors, because if I feel like I'm not going to be good at this, or I shouldn't be doing that, or I should be doing better, I might just avoid it altogether. So like some procrastination. It can make us feel more hopeless about our situation. Of course, it adds guilt, right? Guilt is based largely in these should or shouldn't statements. It contributes to fear, worry, anxiety, low self-esteem, low self-worth, and self-defeatism. So these dangers of shoulding. What happens when we should or shouldn't others? So we do this for ourselves. We should all over ourselves, but are we shoulding and or shouldn't thing all over others? How does it make it feel? Does it make things worse? Does it fix or solve anything? No, generally it makes us just feel bitter, and this bitterness is caused by this distorted thought pattern. And the feelings of anxiety, low self-worth, they're caused because of that thought pattern. Another distorted thought pattern is emotional reasoning. And emotional reasoning is somebody concludes that their emotional reaction to something or a situation or a person proves that what they feel is true. So I feel it, therefore it must be true, despite that there is opposing or conflicting evidence. So it creates an emotional truth that can be in direct conflict with the truth, the perceptual truth, or what really happened. Again, it creates feelings of fear, anxiety, tension. It can be associated with panic attacks or anxiety disorders. And the example there is, even though a spouse has shown only devotion, a person using emotional reasoning might conclude, I know my spouse is being unfaithful because I'm feeling jealous. Or I might even be feeling isolation. So there's that emotion, because I feel this way, it must be true. Some other examples are you're feeling guilty of something. So you conclude that you must be guilty, even though there's no evidence that you did anything wrong. You have feelings of worthlessness, even though every day you demonstrate that you are worthy as an individual and you are worthy to everyone else, and other people are saying that you are worthy. You feel enraged or angered by somebody, so you assume that they must have done something bad, even though you don't know what it is. Or you feel lonely, so you decide or you conclude that no one cares about you and you're unlovable. So my feeling is causing me to assume certain things. And we can also judge others based on how we feel and not thinking of what might be going on with them too. That's part of emotional reasoning. Jumping to conclusions is another distorted thought pattern, and it's they're all negative, but this one is where we judge something without giving it all the facts. So we reach unwarranted conclusions, and we decide without getting the right information to be sure that my decisions are right, or that my conclusions are right. And it leads to poor decisions because we don't get the evidence that's needed. And it also causes more harm than it does good. Jumping to conclusions, this thought pattern really is kind of an easy way out because it stops us from taking responsibility. because we will allow ourselves to hide behind the story we tell ourselves, because I've jumped to a conclusion and I'm going to hide behind that. Whether I don't have the evidence to back up my decision or my conclusion, but I'm going to hide behind that. And it keeps us stuck in the past, because we usually base our conclusions that we jump to in past information, old information. So we assume our assumptions or these conclusions are based in old information. And it's lazy because it doesn't allow us, or we don't allow ourselves to start asking the right questions, get the information that we needed. We just jump to conclusions. Usually it's a negative mindset, and it reinforces negativity. Can be a toxic behavior because sometimes we will lash out at somebody else because we protect ourselves. So some blame will happen. And it becomes a bad habit. The more assumptions that we make, the easier it is for us to make them. And what this can look like, jumping to conclusions. So mind reading, we think we have access to everybody's thoughts and their knowledge. We can read their minds. So we assume we know what other people's are thinking. And generally we assume they're thinking something negative. They're thinking negatively of me. You know, people must hate me because I'm fat. Well, we're not mind readers. We don't know what other people are thinking, but that's a distorted thought pattern. Or we're fortune telling. So we have these fixed expectations on how things will turn out before they happen. So I'm going to predict the outcome of something, usually negatively, before having any evidence or before it even happened. There's no point to starting a diet because I'm just going to break it. So give me another cupcake. So I've predicted the outcomes before it even happened. And then labeling. We're labeling all members of a certain group with the characteristics seen in some, or seen in one, or seen in one situation. And it's usually unfavorable. It's an unfavorable description to a complex person in a complex situation. You know, the mechanic didn't fix my car, but they took my money. All mechanics are incompetent and thieves. So we're labeling based on one thing. So mind reading, a little bit more into that. We assume we know what other people are thinking, and we rely on mind reading. Or when we rely on mind reading, we often experience depression and anxiety, because when we're mind reading for somebody else, it's generally negative. It's negative, based in negativity. We predict that what will occur with no evidence or little evidence, and we try and control the situation. And we act in ways that support what our mind reading was unknowingly. So we create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm going to act in ways because I think this person doesn't like me for whatever reason, because I'm fat. Well, I'm going to act standoffish to them, and I'm not going to try and make a connection with them. So, you know, they might think I'm standoffish and I'm rude. And so it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, all based on mind reading that's not true. And then labeling. So labeling is a cognitive distortion or a negative thought pattern when we generalize by taking one characteristic or one behavior of a person and apply it to the whole entity, the whole person, the whole situation. And what happens when we start to label, we either label ourselves or we're labeling other people, we reduce that person to the label we've given them, even though situations, people, relationships are complex, but we reduce them to that one label. And we filter out, or we don't take into consideration or even look at other characteristics, other behaviors that generally don't fit the label that we've applied to ourselves or to other people. So we start to believe the label. And that makes there's no room for change. So if we're labeling ourselves, you know, we reduce ourselves to that label, there's no room for change. And we're not looking at all the other aspects or characteristics or decisions or attitudes or behaviors that we do. Same thing when we're labeling other people. And it can sound like, you know, she's frequently running late. She must be irresponsible. So I've labeled as irresponsible. My spouse doesn't listen when I talk. Therefore, they are uncaring. I lost my patience with my loved one. I'm a bad caregiver. I forgot to call my mom. I'm a bad child. He gave in to her. He's a pushover. So we're labeling based on, one thing that happened, which is not fair, right? So labeling, the dangers of this is we're not looking objectively at a person, the complexity of the situation, et cetera. We just assign them that negative label to ourselves or to others. So this really does lead to hopelessness, despair, and depression, particularly when we're doing it for ourselves. It stunts our creativity, and again, it stunts our room for growth. And then for others, we make broad assumptions about people, and it's really unfair and really damages relationships too. And then personalization. So personalization is another distorted thought pattern that I think is pretty common for our caregivers, but we assume the blame and the guilt for things that are outside of our control. So hope you are hearing this as a theme, right? We take the blame and then we feel guilty for stuff that's outside of our control. We see things as our fault, even though we couldn't have prevented it, could not have prevented it. And then we blame ourselves. So we blame ourselves for the way things are turning out in our lives. Either we take on that responsibility, or sometimes we might shift the blame to somebody else unfairly. So the dangers in this, we engage in these negative thought patterns, and we don't get the opportunity to better ourselves or correct our thoughts and our feelings. We're not learning from mistakes. It's a self-sabotage type of behavior, and of course, it increases our feelings of guilt, inadequacy, and helplessness. Damages relationships, and there's extreme frustration, and it really is a no-win situation. So an example of personalizing and blaming is Dad had an angry outburst. I must have made him angry. So we took responsibility for something that we didn't have control over, took for somebody else's thoughts and feelings, right? And blame, if she would have planned better, we would not be in this mess. So failing to take responsibility, right, for something we failed to do while blaming somebody else for the outcome. Both examples are personalizing because it's either our fault or it's somebody else's. And there is blaming, so we're blaming in both examples. We're either blaming ourselves or blaming someone else, blaming something that's out of our control. And assumptions made that if anything goes wrong, there is someone to blame. There can be no mistakes. So the great news is we just walked through some of these distorted thought patterns. Let's talk about how can we untwist these distorted thought patterns or not let them take control over our lives. Because we do have the power to change our thoughts. And a negative mind will never give us a positive life. So how do we take these thoughts that are not healthy, that are generally based in untruths, and start to reframe them so we have better outcomes? And it all starts with our thoughts. Excuse me. What we tell ourselves, the thoughts that we tell ourselves, influence how we feel about ourselves. So our emotions, how we feel, how we believe, what we believe about ourselves, how we feel, are going to influence our actions and decisions. And our actions and decisions are really going to be what our behaviors are. So how we act, how we behave, the decisions we make, the attitudes we have, how we talk to ourselves, how we talk to others, is all based on the thoughts we tell ourselves, because those thoughts turn into how we feel and the beliefs that we start to believe, and then turns into how we behave. So it is this self-fulfilling circle right here, but we have the power to tell ourselves, to change our thoughts if we need to. So an example, I'm so sorry, I want to walk through, is caregiving example is Mom won't eat for me, but she'll eat for everybody else. That's a situation. The thought is I'm a failure as a caregiver or even a daughter. My mom wants somebody else to care for her. I'm just not going to visit as often. She doesn't want me there. So that's the thought I tell myself. I'm a failure. Mom doesn't want me there. I'm not going to visit as often. Of course, those thoughts are going to lead to feelings of bitterness, guilt, depression, sadness, and it sets in a relationship with your mom that it's setting up for decline. Those feelings lead to consequences. I'm not going to visit as often. I miss out on the good times. I miss out on a growing relationship with my mom. And now I have low self-esteem and depression. So this is a very real situation that comes with thoughts, feelings, and the consequences of this. So what we want to do, because that's not really based in reality, what we want to do is first we have to recognize that there's a negative thought pattern. We got to recognize, well, what I'm telling myself is negative. So really, we have to ask ourselves what words, what language are we using? The words always, never, impossible, needs to be perfect, I'm a failure, all ruined. These words we have to listen to and be aware of those, because that's what contributes to, the thought pattern, right? So mom is being impossible. She always fights me during meals. She doesn't want my help, and I'm never going to get better at this. I'm a failure and ruin all of our visits together. So I recognize that that's the thought pattern I have, and it's negative. The second part of this, to reframe our thinking, is to really describe or write down the situation that led you to these thoughts. And it's just the facts. We're leaving the emotion out of it. I'm just writing just the facts for this. So is there a certain event, certain interaction, whatever triggered these thoughts? We can capture the emotions, but I want to write down the actual situation. When I visit during a meal, when I visit mom during a meal, no matter what I try, she will not eat. Other family, other staff members don't have problems getting her to eat. It's frustrating and it's embarrassing, and I feel inadequate. So we're writing down the facts, but then we're writing down, well, what the emotions I have for this. And then we want to really talk about the results or the consequences of those feelings. So mealtime is difficult. I don't understand. And my feelings of embarrassment and inadequacy make me not want to visit. And I have not been visiting as often. And when I do, I have a bad and disengaged attitude with my mom. So those are the consequences of those feelings of embarrassment and inadequacy. So let's challenge those initial thoughts. Okay, so we've recognized the thought pattern. We've recognized what's caused those thoughts, the feelings that the thoughts are giving us, and the consequences of those feelings. So let's challenge it. Let's reframe it. The thought is, mom is being impossible. She always fights me during meals. She doesn't want my help, and I'm never going to get better at this. I'm a failure, and I ruin all of our visits. The first question to ask yourself, is that really true? And it's asking ourselves the right question. So is every meal a fight? Am I really the only one she doesn't eat for? Are we just assuming this? Are we basing this in facts, or just what we see when we're there? And are our visits ruined because of this? Do we never laugh? Do we never smile? Is it always disruptive? And are we a failure as a caregiver and a daughter because of this one situation? Does success of being a caregiver or a daughter hinge on mealtime? So what would your advice be if this was your best friend or a sibling or a spouse? What would your advice be to this person? That can be another question to ask as we're starting to reframe our thoughts. Because we need to choose a new thought, because my thought is going to influence my feelings influence my beliefs influence my actions. So what is your desired goal? What do we want? I want to have a good visit with mom, and I want to feel good about the care that I give to her. So we use optimistic, positive words. So we're being very intentional about the words we're using, but we're being realistic too. Mom is having a harder time during meals. I notice she does better with others that help her, and that's just part of the disease. To make the most of our visits, I'm going to visit at a different time, and that might be better for both of us. We see the positivity there. It's not negative, I'm a failure. It's, this is a disease state that changes. I don't like it, but I need to change with it. And I'm going to try a different time to visit. Another thought, a new thought could be, mom is having a harder time during meals. She's not fighting me. She is fighting the disease, and she's doing the best she can. So I'm not personalizing it, right? Or another thought could be, not every visit is going to be perfect, but I'm going to try and make the most out of each visit and at least show my mom I love her. So I hope you see that these new thoughts, as we work through twisted thoughts and we start to reframe a new thought, if I really have better thoughts, the situation's mom having a hard time during meals, but my thought is, this is hard, but I am confident in my skills and my decisions that I've got providing the best care for her. This is part of her disease process, and we will continue to give her the best care as things change. So these thoughts lead to feelings of acceptance, confidence, improved self-esteem, love, and we're going to be able to better process feelings of grief. And when we do this, the consequences or the outcomes of it, we continue to have good visits, mom and daughter have well-being, better well-being, and higher quality of life, and continue a strong relationship. And all of this is predicated on, what are the thoughts I'm telling myself? Another way to work through this is use data. What are the facts? Is this true? Is it not true? And leaving our feelings out. But then thinking about, okay, these are the feelings I have. What's a more helpful way to see this? It's going to be a better way. And then maybe I have a contingency plan, right? I do like that option. If X happens, I will. If I get there, mom does start to get agitated during mealtime, I will do X. Instead of me getting upset and just leaving, I will get help from a staff member, or we will stop and do something else. That way we can have a good visit. But we want to keep in mind that challenging distorted thought patterns and changing them is a process. And the goal is progress. It's not perfection. It does take daily discipline, sometimes really just to recognize that we have distorted thoughts, distorted thought patterns, whether it's labeling or personalizing stuff, or I should really change this guilt feeling or guilt word to regret. It takes daily discipline to recognize it, understand the consequences of it, and then really start to reframe. How do I change this again? Because my thoughts are going to predict my feelings and my beliefs about myself, about my situation, other people, and those beliefs and feelings are going to influence my actions, behaviors, and decisions. And of course, those actions are going to influence my thoughts. But we have the power to change our thoughts. And I really like this. We need to give our heart time to catch up with our head. Particularly if we are working through these exercises every day, sometimes it does take our heart a little bit longer to catch up with our head. So we do it. We may not believe it right now. I still might believe that I am a failure as a daughter and a caregiver, but I'm working through this process. And eventually these thoughts that I continue to tell myself are going to influence my feelings, beliefs, which will influence my actions. And we don't have to go at this alone, right? We want to talk to trusted people. We want to get a part of a support group that's trusted. Education is very important. So we can see different perspectives, different challenges, and really challenge those distorted thought patterns. So more information about supporting yourself and forgiving yourself. It is okay. You can do this. You deserve self-care and you deserve to work through these exercises. You are worth it. You do a lot of selfless care every day. Sometimes we have to let it go. No one is perfect. And we don't need to dwell in the past. Dwelling in the past just causes anxiety, right? We want to learn from the past, but we don't dwell on it. We don't ruminate. We don't allow it to take over. And then we challenge ourselves to help others with the knowledge and the gifts that we have gained. So there's a list of some resources that you'll have, our information, and I will stop sharing. If there are any questions or anything anybody wants to share, Holly, was there anything that that came up in chat?
We did have a lot in chat, and I tried to answer all of it as I could. One question that just came up, and I referred them to the Holidays in Dementia that is on our YouTube right now, but about taking someone out of a facility and taking them home, more so for themselves themselves, the guilt of leaving someone in a facility and not taking them home. Can you speak to that just briefly? And then for everyone, we have a YouTube channel, James L. West Center for Dementia Care, and there is a program up right now called Holidays in Dementia. So that's a great place to go. But Jamie, could you speak to that briefly?
And you mean for taking them home for the holidays, I
Yeah,
assume?
taking them home for the holidays, having guilt if they don't.
Yeah, and well, I'd kind of push that back to you, Holly, but I would say, I mean, are you taking them home for the holidays for them or for you? Right? Is it going to be can you still enjoy the holidays where they're at? It's just going to look different. It is. And who are you doing it for? Right? Because your loved one's going to enjoy the holidays wherever you bring it to them. And I think that's, Holly, do you have something to add?
Yeah, and a lot of times whenever someone is insisting on taking them home, when we really get down to it, we're doing it more for us. And people will say, but we've always. Well, but we haven't always been at this point in the disease. And we need to celebrate where their home is. And if their home is at a facility right now, if their home in a community, in a center like we are, then reserve a part of that place, reserve a dining room, reserve a area, or just go and be part of. I know we're having all kinds of stuff here at the West Center, and the families are always invited to it. Keep in mind, time doesn't mean the same thing to a person with dementia. Time, we could go in and say Christmas is today and Christmas is today. We could have Christmas anytime. So it's us working through our feelings of guilt about not necessarily bringing them home or doing it on Christmas Day. But I do refer you to that. I put my email, we're right at time. I put my email, you've got Jamie's email. She's going to send you a slew of resources today. I encourage you to get on support group. But go to our YouTube page and look at the one on holidays and dementia, please.
And I will add, there was a direct message about, because there was a question about placement and feeling guilt for placement. And that is, there's a lot of guilt around placement. We do have a whole program. It's called I Made a Promise. And that's, I made a promise, the heartbreak of guilt and a promise, break something promise like that. I'll look for the link and send it to y'all. But there is a lot of guilt around placement, but I think it's disproportionate guilt that's around that. There's a reason somebody needs to move to a facility because they need a higher level of care. It's a safety concern. It can be safety for that person with the disease, but also safety for that caregiver. That's huge. And when we're providing the highest level of care for a person, a lot of times, just like what Holly said, we're not coming home to visit or taking them home for the holidays. Well, are we not providing them the highest level of care they deserve for them or for me? Right. So.
And in closing, I'm going to say one thing real fast. And those of you who are on a support group, and I see a bunch of you, you've heard me say this over and over. Let's start to replace guilt with this is actually grief that I'm feeling. And part of grief is guilt. And then let's have some grace. Let's switch from guilt, from grief, from guilt to grief to grace. All right. We're going to close. We're right at time.
Thank you.
It does start at 1 o'clock though. We will send you information. Be looking for it later today. Bye.
Thank you all.